So this video lesson extends the idea that was started in the measuring metric units video lesson where we talked about the units themselves and goes into converting between different units that are all based on the same basic unit. So we looked at the end of the last video lesson at this relationship between the different units of the metric system, how starting with length, capacity, or mass, we start with one of our three basic metric units, either a meter, a liter, or a gram. And those three units have prefixes added to the beginning of them to represent different amounts of the particular unit. In the case of kilo, hecto, deca, it is multiples, 10 times for a deca, 100 times for a hecto, 1,000 times for a kilo. Or in the case of deci, centa, and milla, we're looking at fractions or parts of it. But still, everything is based around these particular units. So I want to start looking at a meter for a second, and particularly look at a kilometer, which is 1,000 times the basic meter. And so if we take a look at a road and say that the space between these two lines is just 1 kilometer. Now, if we say that that space is 1 kilometer, we know something immediately about it, and that's that it also represents 1,000 meters. And so this is just what we know because this is the definition of a kilometer. A kilometer is 1,000 meters, like a kiloliter is 1,000 liters, and a kilogram is 1,000 grams. So based on the fact that we know it's 1,000 meters, we can start to fill in the steps in between. Because between a meter and a kilometer, we also have a decameter, not dm, but dkm rather, a decameter, and a hectometer. So we know that a decameter, one singular decameter, actually represents 10 meters. So if we take our 1,000 meters and we want to find out how many decameters are there, we just need to divide by 10 because we're going to split those 1,000 meters up into equal groups of 10. Equal sets of 10. So 1,000 divided by 10 equals 100, and so it turns out that 1,000 meters is the same as 100 decameters. We'll go one more step here. We'll change the meters into hectometers. We know that for each meter, we have equal sets of 100 that form a hectometer, because a hectometer, remember back to our chart here, is the same as 1,000 meters because hecto represents 1,000 of the basic units. So 1,000 meters divided into equal groups of 100 gives us 10 hectometers. So 1 kilometer is the same as 1,000 meters, is also the same as 100 decameters, 10 hectometers, etc. Now, I'm going to ask you to stop here and pause the video for a second, but I want you to look at the other end of the spectrum now, which is the spectrum of deca, centa, and milla. Remembering that it takes 10 decimeters to make a meter, 10 decimeters to make a meter, 100 centimeters to make a meter, and 1,000 millimeters to make a meter. And I want you to see if you can use this idea, taking these 1,000 meters and finding out how many decimeters, centimeters, and millimeters are in 1,000 meters. Go ahead, pause the video, and come back in a second once you're done with that, and we will look at how we go through that. So now this time, instead of dividing our 1,000 meters into equal parts, we're actually going to be multiplying them. Because for each of our 1,000 meters, and we'll start writing over here on the left, for each of our 1,000 meters, we know that for each meter, there are 10 decimeters. So if 1 meter is 10 decimeters, 2 meters is 20 decimeters, etc. So we just need to multiply 10, and we get that 1,000 meters is the same as 10,000 decimeters. And we can go through a similar process of multiplying by 100 for centimeters, getting to 100,000 centimeters, and eventually to 1 million millimeters when we take each of our 1,000 meters and we multiply it by 1,000 millimeters in every meter. That gives us 1 million, 1,000,000. So 1 kilometer is actually the same as each of these steps that we see. And I want you to see if you can notice something. You don't have to pause the video here, but I want you to see if you can notice a pattern going from the kilometer down here at the bottom, moving all the way up to the millimeter, about how we can move straight from this kilometer to hectometers, decameters, meters, decimeters, centimeters, and eventually millimeters. So see what you can discover in that. Is there a pattern? Is there something we can do with the number of kilometers to find hectometers, decameters, etc.? You don't have to pause the video. I'm going to give you about 5 seconds to look at this and see if you notice a pattern, and then keep going. So what you might have noticed is that in order to go from 1 kilometer to 10 hectometers, we just have to multiply by 10. And from hectometers to decameters, we just have to multiply by 10. From decameters to meters, to decimeters, to centimeters, and to millimeters. To move from one of the larger units to the immediately next smaller unit, we just have to multiply by 10. And in general, with this type of movement in the metric system, from kilometers to millimeters, all we have to do is multiply by 10 from a larger unit to a smaller unit. And that should make sense, because if we start with something like, let's say 3.75 hectometers, and we want to find out that is equal to how many decimeters, because it turns out we need to measure what's going on in decimeters. Well, if we're going to convert this amount of hectometers to decimeters, decimeters are smaller, so there should be more of them in the same amount of space. So from hectometers, we can convert to decameters, to meters, and then to decimeters. Each of these steps, converting from one to another, we just multiply by 10, because there are 10 decimeters in a meter, 10 meters in a decameter, 10 decameters in a hectometer. So we can go through and multiply. I'll just do this first one by 10. But if you forget some of the processes from the scientific notation video, remember that every time that you multiply by 10, you just move the decimal point one space. So we have 37.5 decameters, 375 meters, or 3,750 decimeters. The other way you can look at this is, notice that you have 1, 2, 3 steps to make. So when we have our decimal point in 3.75, that is 1, 2, 3 times that you are multiplying by 10. So see if you can take that idea and convert these 3 conversions using liters from larger units to smaller units. So 1.5 kiloliters to a deciliter, 0.045 decaliters to liters, and 90 hectoliters to centiliters. So for 1.5 kiloliters, I'm going to go through this in both ways. For 1.5 kiloliters, we're starting here. From kiloliters, we can step down the chain from kiloliter to hectoliter, decaliter, liter, and finally to deciliter. And each time that we move down the chain, we are increasing by a factor of 10, because there are 10 hectoliters in a kiloliter, 10 decaliters in a hectoliter, 10 liters in a decaliter, 10 deciliters in a liter. And so every time that we go through, we're just going to end up moving our decimal point in the unit that we have, because we have 1.5 kiloliters. Move it 1 for that. That means we have 15 hectoliters, 150 decaliters, 1,500 liters, or finally 15,000 deciliters. Now, if we wanted to look at it by the number of steps that we have, from kiloliter to deciliter is 1, 2, 3, 4 steps down the chain. So we have 1.5 times 10 4 times. In scientific notation, we can represent that as 1.5 times 10 to the 4th, because we are multiplying by 10 4 times. And to make that conversion in scientific notation, you just have to move 1, 2, 3, 4 decimal places. So 1, 2, 3 zeros need to be added, or 15,000 deciliters. Let's take a look at 0.045 deciliters. Deciliters to liters is actually just one step. So 0.045, multiply that by 10 and get 0.45 liters. Again, if we wanted to look at it more in the scientific notation kind of idea and just count the number of steps, we only move one step. So we just need to have 0.045 times 10, which is the same as 10 to the first, and move that decimal place, get 0.45 liters. And finally, 90 hectoliters to centiliters. Hectoliters jump down the chain to deciliters, liters, deciliters, and centiliters. So we are making 1, 2, 3, 4 jumps of 10. So just moving the decimal place, 900 deciliters, 9,000 liters, 90,000 deciliters, and finally 900,000 centiliters, or in the scientific notation idea, 90 times 10 to the fourth. Just add 4 zeros because the decimal point is at the end, and you get 900,000 centiliters. So now I want to look at this from the other perspective. What if we want to go in reverse? What if we know that a certain container holds 1,700 centiliters, or a similar amount of deciliters, and we want to find out how many liters that represents, how many kiloliters that represents, perhaps. So what if we wanted to convert from smaller units to larger units? I want you to pause the video here again and see what you can come up with in terms of what should we do. If we multiply to go from larger unit to smaller unit, what should we do to go from smaller unit to larger unit? So let's look at a large amount of water. And I'm going to draw what could be a container here filled with water, just with this amount of water here. And we're going to say that this amount of water is 5,000 milliliters. Well, now, if we're looking at our chain, I'm going to draw this one down. We can convert these milliliters into centiliters, deciliters, liters, deciliters, hectoliters, or kiloliters. So immediately, we know that we can jump from milliliters to liters because there are 1,000 milliliters per liter. So if we have 5,000 milliliters and we want to divide it into equal liters of 1,000, that means that we have 5 liters. And in each liter, now that we have a large unit, we can convert back. That's 50 deciliters and 500 centiliters, because each of these represents a jump of 10. And finally, liters, we know that there are 1,000 liters in a kiloliter. So now we're actually going to do, if we jump from liters to kiloliters, we're going to have to do 5 divided by 1,000. And so to do that, if you go through that decimal division there, you end up with 0.005 kiloliters. Now, similarly, we can work backwards to liter. We know how to go from kiloliter to hectoliter, which is times 10, 0.05. Hectoliter to deciliter, which is also times 10, 0.5. And finally, back to liter. So if we look at this backwards then, instead of going from a kiloliter to a milliliter, what do you notice about converting from milliliter to centiliter to deciliter to liter, etc., when we move from a smaller unit to a larger one? Well, what you should notice is that if going up this scale, from larger to smaller, we multiply by 10, then going backwards down that, we should just use the inverse operation of multiplication, which is dividing by 10. So to go from a larger unit to a smaller one, because in 1 kiloliter, for example, there will be lots and lots of milliliters, we multiply by 10 for every step. Whereas if we're starting with something in a smaller unit, and we want to go to something that is very large, we may have thousands of milliliters, but it will represent a small number of hectoliters and perhaps not even a kiloliter. So if we're converting from smaller to larger, we're going to divide that number into 10 because we're splitting it into progressively larger and larger groups. So I'm going to do this one problem here to the left from decigrams to decagrams together as an example, and then I'll set you off to work on these other two problems, and then we'll give you the last 6 review problems that ask you to use either one of these two. So for 2,458 decigrams, we can look at it either way. 2,458 decigrams, I'm going to write it this way because my chain on the left goes from largest to smallest, from top to bottom. This is 2 steps up the chain, so we're going to divide by 10 each time. That divided by 10 is 2,458, because to divide by 10 moves the decimal point the other way. And finally, 24.58 decagrams. Now, we haven't talked about a way of representing it in scientific notation. There is, but we're not going to get to that right now, or even in the class this year. So remember, just for every step that you are moving from a smaller unit to a larger, you're just dividing the number by 10 because each unit represents a group of 10 of the next smaller one. So go ahead and pause the video and see what you can do with converting 318 centigrams to hectograms and 34,600 milligrams to kilograms. So welcome back. We're going to convert here from centigrams all the way up to hectograms, but to do that we have to jump through decigrams, grams, decagrams, and hectograms. 318 centigrams, each time we jump is going to divide by 10. So that we end up with 31.8 decigrams, 3.18 grams, 0.318 decagrams, and 0.0318 hectograms. Alternatively, knowing that we just jump 1, 2, 3, 4 parts of the chain, we can start with 3.18, or 318 rather, find the decimal point and just move it back 1, 2. Let's try that again. A little bit larger so we can see this. 1, 2, 3, 4 steps to make it to hectograms. And finally, 34,600 milligrams. If we write this, I'm just going to use that second idea here. Writing out all of these things here, we are going to jump 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. 6 jumps on our chain means that we're going to move our decimal point because we're dividing by 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. So this is 0.0346 kilograms. So now, remember that when we convert from a larger unit to a smaller unit, we're going to have more smaller units, so we multiply by 10. If we convert from smaller to lesser, or from smaller to larger, there are going to be we're going to divide by 10 because we're splitting our milligrams, for example, into progressively larger and larger units. So go ahead and pause the video and see what you can do about converting these 6 ideas here. I know this is a long video. This is the end of it here. Just go ahead and convert these, pause the video, and then unpause it when you're ready to move on. So for number 1, we have 1,400 deciliters. Deciliters are smaller than liters, so we're going to divide by 10 when we jump from deciliters to liters. This is 140 liters. Number 2, 135 decameters to kilometers. Decameters is smaller than a kilometer, so each time we jump up the chain, we're going to divide by 10 because the units are getting smaller. We have 13.5 hectometers, so 1.35 kilometers. In number 1, we moved the decimal point 1 place. In number 2, we're going to move the decimal point 2 places. Number 3, 1 hectogram to grams. We start with the hectogram. we go through a decagram and then down to the gram. That is 2 times. We're making units smaller, so we're going to multiply by 10 each time. If we wanted to start with our 1 hectogram, we're going to jump 2 spaces down the metric unit chart, so that would be multiplied by 1 to the 2nd power, which will just give you answer of 100. For number 3, 40 milligrams to decagrams. Milligrams are very small, so we have to go through centigrams, decigrams, grams, and finally decagrams to get there. 40 milligrams, 1, 2, 3, 4 jumps of dividing by 10 each time. So if we start with 40, we're going to move our decimal place 1, 2, 3, 4, or 0.004 decagrams, 0.25 kiloliters to liters. We have kiloliters, hectoliters, decaliters, and liters. That is 1, 2, 3 jumps where we are multiplying by 10. So we just move our decimal points 1, 2, 3 places, end up with 250 liters. And finally, from meters to decimeters to centimeters and down to millimeters, 1, 2, 3 jumps of 10 again. So starting with 1.075, 1, 2, 3 movements of the decimal points, 1,075 millimeters.